My wife had an affair with my own father. I found out the truth through a DNA test. I'm a happily married 35-year-old guy. My wife is 34 and is the mother of our two daughters, aged 6 and 3. We both come from the same hometown. We dated in high school and were high school sweethearts. We ended up attending the same college, continued to date, got engaged, and tied the knot after graduating. My father was a good dad to my sister and me. He had a temper and drank too much, but he loved us deeply and never harmed us. However, he was a consistent cheater on my mother, especially around 13 or 14 years ago when I was 22 and my wife was 21. During that time, my parents' marriage went through a rough patch with separations. He almost lost everything he had worked for in his business due to a dishonest my father had a business partner who caused financial turmoil and legal troubles. My mother is an angel who struggled to support him emotionally because he was frequently angry, drank a lot, and was verbally offensive. He began having affairs, which my mother found out about and forgave. He repeated this behavior not long after they separated again, but eventually reconciled. I suspect there were more than just 2 instances, but to my knowledge, my mother only knows about 2 during this period. My future wife was with me in college for one summer. She returned home to take classes. At our hometown community college, my wife was able to earn credits for her degree more affordably while staying at her parents' house. I was a year ahead in my degree and stayed at our college for my coursework. My dad had lost one of his receptionists and suggested that my wife could work for him to earn some money. I told her about the job opportunity, and she was happy to have a flexible job that allowed her to earn extra cash. Everything seemed fine after we got married. My wife expressed discomfort around my dad, though. She said she didn't trust him, pointing to his infidelity multiple times. I didn't fully understand at the time, but I agreed with her that his actions toward my mother were terrible. I could understand his emotional insecurity, but the repeated cheating made me dislike him intensely. However, if my mom could forgive him, I thought she should too. Right when our first daughter was born, my wife revealed that she wasn't comfortable with our daughter being alone with my dad. She was fine as long as my mom was present, but not when she was alone with him. I found it strange. My dad was a cheater, but he wasn't a psycho. After some persistent questioning, my wife finally admitted that my dad had been excessively flirtatious with her when she worked for him those years ago. I was furious with him. She mentioned that she had moved on from it, but his behavior during that summer when she worked for him had left her with immense distrust. I didn't share this with anyone. I wanted to confront him about it, but he'd probably deny it, which would hurt both of us since I knew my wife was telling the truth. It would also devastate my mother if she found out that my wife and I didn't trust our children around them because her husband, my dad, had hit on my wife all those years ago. For many years, I actively encouraged her to seek counseling, but she consistently refused. As time went on, we dropped the subject and never brought it up again. This past weekend, my wife and I celebrated our 11th anniversary. We went out for dinner and drinks. After she'd had a few drinks, she finally opened up about everything for the first time. My father's actions weren't just limited to excessive flirting. She confessed that while she worked with him, he progressed from flirting to hugging, kissing, touching, and then eventually she led his fingers to do it. She said he reached into her skirt, and it happened. Over the following weeks, the situation escalated. She resisted most if she tried to avoid the situation, but he asked her to work late or visit his office when no one else would be there. It turned out that a few times he called her into his office, closed the door, and became physically inappropriate. She felt uncomfortable but never explicitly said no. She did express that this is wrong on multiple occasions, but never left the situation. I assume she didn't know how to handle it. On one occasion, he began taking off her clothes and proceeded on another occasion. He exposed himself to her and placed her hand on his junk, and she proceeded to give him a blowjob. On the last occasion, they were both completely unclothed, and he pressured her to engage further. She's adamant that they didn't have intercourse, stating that he almost went through with it when she declined and said it would be wrong. He persisted and suggested that if she got pregnant, she should claim he was the father. She was fearful and angry. She got dressed and left, quitting her job. I'm devastated, bewildered, and furious. I can't eat or sleep. I've harbored anger toward my dad for years for what he did to my mom. I now know the entire story. My father pursued my girlfriend, placed her in uncomfortable situations, and it led to inappropriate activities on multiple occasions with my wife. I never spoke up during or after because I was afraid of hurting my relationship with her and our family dynamics. Given what I know about my father, I believe my wife. I know he was a womanizer, a cheater, and someone who put people in awkward situations, so it's hard to doubt her account. What she's describing aligns with other things I know he's done, but this takes it to a much more disturbing level. What on earth is going on? I never want to see my father. I want to make him feel remorseful. My wife says it's taken many years, but she's moved on. She doesn't want to revisit old wounds. I still have strong resentment toward my father when I ask for more details. I feel guilty for bringing up a painful topic, but she prefers not to discuss it. I'm perplexed by my wife's actions. I have a hard time with negative emotions toward her because she was a victim. It's a tough situation, being 21 and dealing with a man 30 years older who's also your boyfriend's father and boss. His persistence is surprising, especially since you should have been able to trust him to help you, not harm you. This led to a really difficult situation. But if I'm completely honest with myself, I'm also perplexed, especially by the fact that this happened more than once, and it got worse over time. My wife has always been strong and independent. She's not afraid to confront others, even at 21. It's not like her to give in to pressure like that. I'm trying not to blame her and feel guilty when I have those thoughts, given what I know about her. She's someone who doesn't hesitate to call out BS. It's just hard to understand why she went along with it for so long. I've known for a while that it made her uncomfortable, but I didn't realize it was this bad. I can't believe these incidents occurred repeatedly. I could understand him pressuring her once, but her staying and allowing it to happen multiple times strikes me as odd. That's where this feeling of infidelity creeps in, although I immediately feel awful realizing that he was clearly the aggressor. From what she says, I get the impression that she doesn't want me to bring it up with anyone. She knows that my father would probably lie and avoid the subject, which could cause problems for the family. She'd prefer that we don't have much contact with him, especially when it involves our children. I agree with her, but I do wonder if there's more to it. I think she's afraid to reveal that might come to light. I wouldn't say that to her, of course, because it would unfairly burden her with undeserved guilt. It's a nagging doubt in my mind. I'm completely lost on how to handle this situation. My wife has carried this secret for over 13 years. I'm deeply upset, feeling depressed and furious at my father. It's all very fresh and overwhelming for me. She discusses it calmly with minimal emotion. I confess I just don't get why she doesn't seem more traumatized when she talks about it. She downplays it, and her mood doesn't change. She can even be pleasant immediately after discussing it. She hasn't shed tears during our conversations, while I'm quite emotional. I'm left wondering if she buried it deep down. I just assumed that despite the terrible circumstances, there would be an outpouring of emotion once it was out in the open. I can't help but wonder if there's some guilt on her part, perhaps for not ending it sooner. Maybe she was more complicit than she's let on. I might be overanalyzing her response because people process such experiences differently, and we're at very different stages of dealing with it. Given that it happened so long ago for her and was only recently revealed to me, I could be wrong. Edit. Since I posted this yesterday afternoon, my wife and I had an extended conversation. In the end, my father was insecure at the time and pursued women to boost his self-esteem. He was attractive, charming, and relentless in his flirtations. Given who I know him to be, I believe my wife's account and understand how it put her in a difficult situation. I believe she froze and allowed things to happen despite feeling uncomfortable, hoping it would eventually stop. She has also shared other details that I won't go into here, but they make it she tried to avoid being alone with him when he was persistent. I mention the infidelity angle because this went on for a long time. He sent her cards, flowers, chocolates, explicit voicemails, and other things, both before and after these incidents. It would be challenging for me to process even if it were another man, let alone my father. So I believed her, but I haven't been in her situation, so it almost sounds like an affair. After many years, without the pressure of those moments and knowing the specifics of what was happening, my mind naturally starts to wander and wonder what if I'd told her, "You're incredibly brave. I don't understand why you don't despise my father because I certainly do." She replied, "I do hate him, but he's a despicable person. I realized a long time ago that it wasn't worth my energy to. She just wants to minimize her one-on-one interactions with him and be very cautious about allowing the kids to be alone with him. I have the urge to confront him about this, but she strongly advises against it because she believes it won't lead to anything positive. She's handling this situation very well. I'm struggling with it because it's a completely new revelation to me, and it's especially difficult since it involves my father. I've always had a hard time respecting my father, but I still love him because he's my dad. My mom is such a kind person, and she's endured his behavior for years. If she found out about all of this, it would devastate her since my wife appears to have moved on in a mature way. I need time to process this, honor her wishes as best as I can, and move forward. Thanks to everyone for their advice. I'm open to more if anyone has more to. Over the past 13 years, we've spent a lot of time with my parents, including vacations and holidays. She's continued to interact with my father face-to-face regularly. I don't understand how she managed to keep this a secret for so long. I've noticed that she avoids extended one-on-one situations with him. She acts as though everything is fine. I wonder why she drove up to his office that night. Did she really do that? I understand that in a work environment she might have had few choices, but it seems like there should have been ways to avoid that drive to his office that night. I can grasp the idea of him kissing or touching her, but how did it escalate to getting so close to actual intimacy, removing clothes and being unclothed together? How did it get that far? She told him she couldn't do it with him because it would be wrong. How about it just being wrong? I know it's unfair to say that when I wasn't in her situation, but it's what's on my mind. At 3, I had a one-on-one conversation with my wife about it. I expressed my reluctance to revisit this topic, which has come up 100 times in the past few days. I needed some clarification. She mentioned that this happened 3 or 4 times, suggesting that it likely occurred more often than that. He made advances on her, and he tried to get her to visit his office after hours, but she managed to find ways to avoid those situations. There were a few occasions when she was alone with him when these incidents did take place. He initiated everything, taking her hand and placing it on his Johnson, even putting it in her face. She felt overwhelmed, and although she resisted him many times, there were instances when she went along with it and things happened. It's not that she doesn't want to discuss it, she just had a difficult time. She's been dealing with it for several years now. After more than 13 years, she's moved on and doesn't want to dwell on it anymore. She regrets disclosing it because she knows how much it hurts me. The tipping point for her was when things came uncomfortably close to actual intimacy, and she decided she didn't care about the consequences. This morning, she admitted that it was an offense. She described it as being forceful and pressured. Maybe it's because she associates the word offense with violence. Since he wasn't violent, she didn't use that word. She strongly opposes me discussing this with anyone. She understands, and she's right that my father would likely deny, lie, and deflect. That would only cause unnecessary drama. Bringing it up would effectively end any relationship either of us has with my dad, and probably my relationship with my mother as well. She prefers to limit her interactions with him to situations where she doesn't feel uncomfortable. Update. I had plans to travel out of town with my parents for a cousin's wedding. Given the recent revelations from my wife, I tried to cancel the trip, but she insisted that we go ahead with it. She pointed out that we had been planning this trip with my parents for months, purchased gifts for the bride and groom, made travel arrangements weeks in advance, booked a hotel, and took time off from work for Friday. Our plan involved riding with my parents in my dad's RV. We'd also planned visits to state parks and historical sites. It was meant to be a wedding trip and a road trip in my dad's RV. My daughters were really looking forward to it, and my cousin was getting married. I was one of the groomsmen, so if I'd canceled, people would have wondered why. I couldn't think of a good excuse except to tell the truth or come up with a ridiculous lie. I don't mind confronting my dad about it. I know he'll deny it, but I want to get to the bottom of this. My wife, though, treats what happened as if it's no big deal. She says I should just move on and get back to business as usual. I can't do that. How can I just overlook the fact that my wife told me my dad went down on her and she gave him a blowjob? They both saw each other naked. She seemed distant and almost indifferent about the whole situation. I thought maybe she'd found a way to compartmentalize the experience over the years or had developed a kind of Stockholm syndrome related to my dad. I felt like she didn't fully understand how this news affected my emotional and mental well-being. After all, he's my father, someone I looked up to despite his flaws and infidelity. I never believed his infidelity had anything to do with me. I thought it was my mom's decision to keep taking him back, cut ties with my father, and prevent him from seeing his grandchildren based on my wife's allegations. It's not a simple matter, especially when she won't allow me to investigate further. She wants me to accept her word without question or the full details. Despite the widely known reputation that my dad is a ladies' man, there's a significant difference between being a womanizer and being a psychopath. She expects me to have a feeling that something doesn't add up, and I'm determined to get to the bottom of this. On Friday morning, we were preparing for our trip, but I had a lot of questions swirling in my mind and I hadn't been sleeping well. We were packing our luggage when my parents pulled up in their Fleetwood. Class, we weren't quite ready when they arrived, so my mom went inside to help my wife get the kids ready. Meanwhile, I had a quick chat with my dad, still trying to figure out how to address the whole situation without any solid proof. I wasn't even sure who to confront. Don't get me wrong, I believe my wife, but her story has some inconsistencies. Even if her account is accurate, she allowed this to go on for years. Why did she bring it only now, after all this time, that she's brought it up? My daughters are now 6 and 3 years old. Why didn't she tell me about this when they were younger? Did she catch my dad doing something suspicious with my daughters? What prompted her to confess after all these years? Something must have happened, but when I tried to discuss it with her, she avoided the conversation. I decided to stop asking questions and attempt to figure out what was really going on. When my parents arrived, I didn't mention the issue to my dad, but I couldn't help but view him differently at this point. Acting normal was challenging, but I did my best. After packing our things, we boarded the RV. We live on the South Coast, and the wedding was on the West Coast, so we had our trip all mapped out. My dad and my wife both enjoy these kinds of trips, including hiking, visiting parks and historical sites, and engaging in adventure. My daughters just relish the excitement of leaving the house for an unknown destination, while my mom and I'm just along for the ride, usually. On trips like this, my dad does most of the driving. I take over when he gets tired. My wife prefers sitting in the passenger seat with her feet up on the dashboard or on the chair. My mom enjoys spending time with the kids in the living area inside the RV. Some people suggested I should get a voice recorder or camera. I thought this trip would be an excellent opportunity to do so. I could strategically place the device to see if anything suspicious happened. I asked. My dad stopped by a Best Buy on the way so I could get 2 voice-activated recorders. I wasn't sure how they would help, but I hoped they might capture something that could shed light on the dynamics of their relationship. After purchasing the voice recorder from the store, I discreetly tested it. Then I settled into the front passenger seat while my dad drove. I discreetly concealed it underneath the passenger seat, knowing that after I vacated, my wife would take my seat when she finished settling the kids in the back. As predicted, she joined my dad in the front seat of the RV while he drove. I sat in the living area behind them, within earshot of their conversation. I tried to catch up on some work on my laptop, but it was difficult for me to comprehend how she could be so at ease with someone she claimed could potentially harm our daughters. The whole situation felt surreal, and I couldn't fathom how she expected me to react. I was at a loss as to what I could do. I started to question my role in this relationship. I felt like I wasn't being true to myself. My dad had crossed boundaries with her, and she expected to dictate how the story unfolds. After hours of driving, we made a few stops. I took the wheel twice to give my dad a break. Our final stop before reaching our destination was at the Grand Canyon. We visited the Grand Canyon National Park for a picnic and to spend the night. During this break, I took the opportunity to I also reviewed the voice recorder to listen to most of their conversation. It seemed pretty ordinary, except for when my dad asked her why she had been avoiding him. She said she had been busy and had already told him it was over. We had been on the road for more than 22 hours. We arrived at our destination on Saturday morning, just in time for the wedding ceremony. Our plan was to park the RV, rent a hotel room for a day, then move back into the RV after the wedding and spend the next 2 days were spent driving and camping along the West Coast. I left the recorder running in the hotel room where my wife and kids stayed while my parents had a separate room. I left early for the wedding because I was part of the groomsmen during the rehearsal. Before the wedding ceremony, all I could think about was what might be happening at the hotel and what the voice-activated recorder was capturing. I was completely absent during the rehearsal, which my cousin noticed, but I assured him that everything was fine. My sister also went to the wedding with her family. During the ceremony, my kids spent most of the time with my mom, niece, and nephew. My dad sat with my sister and my wife throughout. I was always looking at my wife and dad. At one point, they disappeared, which made me worry. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. I felt anxious at the wedding. It was far from enjoyable. I went back to the hotel to change for the wedding reception. Back at the hotel room, I played back the recording to see what the voice-activated recorder might have captured while I was away. I heard my mom and dad entering the room. My mom left with my daughter, and my dad yelled, "I'll join you guys later." A few minutes later, I heard my wife saying, "No, no," but not in an assertive way. She said, "We can't keep doing this. What's wrong with you? Stop, stop." I could hear my dad murmuring something, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. I only heard the sound of kisses. My wife kept saying no, 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 with the no fading after a while. Then I started hearing more kisses, which turned into moaning. My wife's moaning got louder. I could clearly hear what they were doing. They were having sex. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. It seemed to interrupt them, so they rushed to put their clothes back on. My mom, she came back and let them know she was heading to the wedding, seemingly unaware of what had transpired. How could she or anyone suspect that a man would engage in such behavior with his daughter-in-law? This must have been going on for 13 years now. I'm left wondering how I didn't suspect anything. How on earth did I not realize that my dad was involved with my wife at that moment? Anger consumed me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. My world had collapsed. I began to understand why people on TV sometimes resort to criminal acts, because that's the emotional state I was in. At the same time, I couldn't help but wonder why my wife would disclose this herself if she hadn't told me. I wouldn't have suspected anything. According to the recordings, it appeared that she was trying to avoid him, but not with utmost determination. My wife is a strong-willed woman in good physical shape and could have resisted strongly, leading my dad. I think she wanted it to happen. Her soft voice suggested as much. If she didn't want it, she could have prevented my mom from taking the kids away. She could have avoided the opportunity to be alone with my dad, a man she claimed was an offender. My dad isn't getting away without facing consequences. Now I fully understand what a despicable scoundrel and loser he is at that moment. If he were here, I would have destroyed him. I couldn't bring myself to return. After the wedding reception, I needed to clear my head and get away from people. The weather in California was nice, so I went to a local bar on the boardwalk, had a few drinks, and then went to a nearby store to buy a six-pack of beer. I carried the six-pack to the beach and watched the ocean. When I woke up, I realized that I had spent the night on the beach, still dressed in my tuxedo and covered in white sand. I hadn't been to the wedding reception the day before. I'd probably had too much to drink, probably the whole six-pack along with the shots I had at the bar. It was now after 7 a.m., and I couldn't remember the last 16 hours. All the terrible emotions came back. Feelings of dread, shame, embarrassment, and betrayal. I was overwhelmed with emotion, wondering how my own father could betray me in this way, along with the people I loved most. For all these years, my marriage had been a lie. At that moment, I decided to expose it. I had more than enough evidence to confirm my wife was having an affair with my dad. I didn't need any further explanations. As I walked towards the hotel, I came across a group of familiar faces, including my dad, sister, wife, cousin, and some of my cousin's friends. They were all surprised to see me, and they told me that they'd filed a missing person report on my behalf. Everyone was eager for answers, but I wasn't holding back. Right there on the street, I told everyone that my dad was having an affair with my wife. I didn't care about the consequences. I'd already made up my mind to sever my relationship with both of them. I disowned my dad, considering him a terrible person amidst the drama unfolding on the street. My wife avoided me. I made eye contact with my dad, tears welling in my eyes. He looked down in shame, while everyone else stared in shock. My sudden disappearance confirmed to everyone that I was telling the truth. My sister, who knew me better than anyone, understood what my dad was capable of and began berating him, asking how he could do such a thing. While this street scene played out, I pointed at my wife and called her a liar. I expressed my complete desire never to see her again in my life, although I was consumed. I was really angry and upset, and I meant every word I said. Then I went straight to the hotel to pack my things. We planned to stay on the West Coast for another 2 days, but I was done with this trip. At least I went to my parents' room, where my mom was with my daughters. She was worried about me, so I told her everything. I soon regretted it because it made her feel worse. My mom had already been through a lot with my dad. My sister and cousin came up to our hotel room to make sure I wasn't going to do anything crazy. My cousin even offered to cancel his honeymoon because of what was going on, but I told him to enjoy his special day. I was really upset later that day. My adrenaline was back to normal. My sister gave me courage, and my kids gave me hope. On that same day, I booked a flight for my daughters. My mom was heading back to the South without seeing my dad or my estranged wife for the rest of the day. We reached the airport on Sunday evening around 9:30 p.m. Our flight was scheduled to depart in 30 minutes. I was accompanied by my mom and daughters. Despite my sister and cousins trying to convince us to stay for one more day, I believed it was best to return home and distance ourselves from my unfaithful wife. I felt like I needed to get back to my usual routine to help distract my mind from everything that's going on. I also have plans to start divorce proceedings as soon as possible, so I want to prepare for that at this point. I don't want my wife to come back to our house or see her again. We managed to get on the flight just in time before the gate closed. When I first booked the flight, I couldn't find 4 seats together. So our seats where the flight was pretty short, about 3.5 hours, and we were home pretty quickly after unpacking our luggage. I drove my mom to my parents' house, where she gathered her belongings. She's planning to stay with us for a while. She's still in disbelief about what happened and has indicated her intention to get a divorce as well. My sister and other relatives called to check on us and see how we were doing. Thanks to my dramatic outburst, everyone knows what happened now. News spreads quickly, and all of my close and extended family members are aware of the situation. I have to admit it was quite embarrassing. This is not the type of news you'd want to become public, even among extended family. Such events stay with you for life. Even if you are the victim, you are still affected. I feel like the shadow of my unfaithful wife and my despicable father follows me around. People may whisper as I pass by and talk behind my back. I still share my father. I guess some of that evil is in me too. Assuming they happen again, future Thanksgiving and July 4th holidays with extended family are likely to be extremely awkward. My wife called me a lot, but I didn't answer. She also sent several text messages, but I didn't receive a call from my dad. My mom told me he called her, and she confronted him about the affair. He denied it and tried to gaslight the situation. She also discussed with me all the suspicious occurrences she had noticed and the compromising situations in which she had caught him. Him and my wife, however, he managed to deceive his way out of them. My mom appears to be in a similar situation as I am, but she had witnessed many more suspicious incidents than I had. She should have connected the dots, but my mom is more gullible than me, and her awareness isn't much better. Now I understand where I inherited most of my naive traits. After my kids had gone to bed, I sat in the living room with my mom to have a heart-to-heart. My mom said she blamed herself for not being able to piece together the puzzle. She believed my dad was somewhat obsessed with my wife, but she admitted that her mind had never put 2 and 2 together. She realized now how foolish she had been for not noticing these things over the years. She mentioned that she found it strange how my wife tried to avoid being alone with my dad. It seemed like my wife had a love-hate relationship with my dad, and my dad was utterly infatuated with her. But she hadn't thought much of it. He showered her with gifts, and no holiday passed without him buying presents for her and my daughters. In her defense, without the context of an affair, it wouldn't be suspicious for a father-in-law to frequently purchase gifts for his daughter-in-law and grandchildren. She recalled several occasions over the years when she noticed something suspicious between them. We live approximately 15 miles from my parents. One instance was when my mom wanted to do laundry, so she told my dad she was going to the laundromat. My dad insisted they come to my house. My mom said there were more than 5 laundromats between their house and mine, and she didn't want to inconvenience us. He convinced her it would be a great opportunity to see the grandkids again, especially since my daughters had visited my parents a few hours ago and were just my wife picked him up, and it was strange that he already missed them, especially since I was out of town that day. That meant it was just my wife and daughters at home, based on her account. It seems like my dad took every chance he could to see my wife when I wasn't home. From what my wife said, the odd thing is that my wife tried to avoid my dad, but he used my mom as an excuse to invite himself to my house when I was away. Since my mom is always oblivious, he took advantage of the opportunity to engage with my wife. For some reason, my wife allowed it. Returning to the story, my dad offered to drive my mom to my house, which she found peculiar because my dad had never shown interest in driving her anywhere except for road trips. When they arrived at my house, it appeared to her that my wife wasn't thrilled to see my dad with her, but my wife didn't express her displeasure. While my wife was doing the laundry, my daughter was playing with my wife's clothes. At some point, she called my wife's name, but she didn't respond. My dad was also nowhere to be found. My daughter went to the room to search for my wife and knocked on the bedroom door. My wife answered, and she was out of breath and her hair was disheveled. My mom mentioned that at that moment, she should have been suspicious. When she returned to the living room, she saw my dad sitting on the couch. She also said that sometimes when she came to visit, she could smell my wife's perfume on my dad. She said that most of the time, he convinced her to come by saying he was visiting the grandkids. But when he arrived, he barely spent time with the grandkids. He only showed interest in visiting them when I wasn't home. It always happened when my wife was home. She also said that she sometimes caught them whispering. When they noticed her, they'd act like nothing was wrong. When she asked what was going on, they always gave vague excuses that didn't make sense. She'd always had suspicions, maybe about money or something else, but not an affair. Now that she put everything together, she felt like their relationship dynamic involved her asking my dad for money and trying to avoid being alone with him when my mom confronted him. My dad sometimes stretched the truth, saying that I had money problems and that since I was too embarrassed to ask for help, my wife was doing it on my behalf. My mom was sharing her story, and I recalled how many times I had wondered how my wife could afford all the branded shoes and handbags she had. She had always been a shopaholic, and even though we had a modest income, she owned numerous high-end clothing and expensive items. I used to be curious about how she managed to. I didn't think much of it at the time because it didn't negatively impact our finances. I believed my wife was very frugal and managed to purchase those items at a discount. After my conversation with my mom, I went to bed late the following day. I visited Home Depot and changed the locks on the front and back doors. My wife had been calling and texting me, but I hadn't responded. I needed to respond at some point. We had a joint account, and I had withdrawn all the money from it, including hers and mine. I was trying to do anything I could to hurt her in return for the pain she had caused me, no matter how minor those actions might seem. I had taken X and all the credit cards with me, and I emptied our joint bank account. She had no means of paying for her expenses or purchasing a plane ticket. I was aware that she wouldn't want to be seen. I couldn't go with her because I was traveling with my dad in his RV. She sent me lots of texts, asking for help and forgiveness. She promised to explain everything, but I didn't respond. My kids didn't know what was going on, and they kept asking for their mom. I told them she was out of town. My mom was really helpful. She spent as much time with my kids as my wife did, which gave me the confidence to do what I had to do. I knew I could manage without my wife at least until we legally separated that evening. I heard a knock on my door, and my mom checked through the peephole, seeing that it was my wife. She called me, and I opened the door to tell my wife that she wasn't allowed in our house. She seemed tired and exhausted, speaking very softly as if she didn't want anyone to overhear. She didn't have her luggage with her because she had rented a hotel. She seemed to have money, maybe from her dad or her parents. She said she didn't want to cause a scene and just wanted to talk to me like an adult. She said she hadn't been getting any responses to her calls or texts, and that we needed to have a conversation to make sure we didn't negatively impact our daughters. I was willing to hear her out without causing a scene or drawing attention from me. If our neighbors ignored her, it wouldn't make her go away. We share 2 daughters. I refused to let her into the house because I knew my daughters would want to spend time with her if they saw her. She understood and agreed. We decided to talk in front of the garage, and I walked with her there. She began by acknowledging that what had happened was wrong and that she should have come to me about it long ago. She admitted that she thought the issue might resolve itself. She didn't initially address it given the circumstances. She understood if I couldn't forgive her, but she asked me to read a letter she had written before making a decision. She handed me the letter and mentioned that she would be staying at the hotel but needed her car keys and some of her belongings. My kids had gone to bed by then, but I made sure it was safe before allowing her to enter and gather her things. She packed only the essentials. She didn't make much noise. It took her about 45 minutes to collect her belongings. After she left, I decided to read the letter she had written. I'm going to share it with you, dear ex. I'm sorry for all the pain I have caused you. I apologize for keeping this secret for all these years. You are the love of my life. I don't know how I can go on without you. The happiest moments, I want to thank you for sharing your life with me. I'm grateful for our children and for your support. I'm not sure where to begin, so let me start from the beginning. As I told you before, your dad made advances towards me when I worked for him during my college years. I found his behavior inappropriate and wanted to discuss it with you, but I was afraid it would damage your relationship with him. I knew your relationship with your dad was already strained. I thought it was best to keep it to myself, as I believed that revealing his advances would only make things worse. I was under the impression that I would be out of there once the school year began. I want to be clear that I'm not making excuses, but your dad manipulated me. There was a time when I quit my job due to his relentless pressure. I didn't go to work for a week, and during that time he bombarded my cell phone. He showered me with gifts and bought me expensive things. I was quite young and easily influenced. He apologized and promised not to make advances or harass me again. He also said I shouldn't tell you about this because it would damage the father-son relationship. I was naive and fell for his manipulation. 2 days after I returned to work, he started hitting on me again. It started with compliments and small touches, and then he made advances. I felt like I wasn't in control because he was overwhelming. I was so stupid to have fallen for it when I wised up to what he was doing. It was already too late. After reading her letter, I realized she was being dishonest because she had an intimate encounter with him just a few days ago. I have the voice recording to prove it. She remains unaware of how I discovered their closeness at the hotel. To make a long story short, I found a good divorce attorney and we went through an amicable divorce. She didn't contest anything and even relinquished her claim to our shared house. We settled for 50-50 custody. I limited my communication with her to matters concerning my daughters. Additionally, I underwent an STD test, which came back negative. I also conducted a DNA test on my daughters, confirming they are both mine, for which I'm thankful. I attempted to reach out to him. I tried to get my dad to tell me what happened, but he refused to meet with me. He's moved to another part of town and is basically estranged from everyone, including my sister and relatives. We don't hear from him much, which is fine with me. The only excuse he gave was that he thought I wouldn't marry her because she was my first girlfriend. It's unbelievable that he tried to steal his own son's wife like an animal.